Let's get started. When we speak about classroom management and in-class discipline, there are two main topics that I believe that we need to look into. We need to look at classroom management from a technical perspective. We need to look at the different frameworks that are available for a teacher in order to set up a disciplinary system that will work for him specifically in the environment that he's dealing with. Something that works for one person will not work for the next person in the same environment. Something that works for a person in one environment will not work for that same person in the next environment. This is why this presentation today will be about general principles, and it will be up to you to find how to apply these principles based on what you are going through in your professional challenges in your workplaces. So we're going to start with the spiritual aspect of class discipline. What do I mean with the spiritual aspect? Well, let's think about ourselves as teachers, not from a technical point of view, not from the point of view of the material that we're teaching, of our job title inside of the building that we're teaching, but rather as like, what is our role in the broader pictures of the human beings that we're dealing with? What is our mission as teachers? Is our mission to cover the material? Means that we start at the beginning of the year with lesson 1, and we must make sure that we finish the last lesson before the last day of teaching. Is that our mission? That's why we are fulfilling this job. Is our mission to entertain students, to babysit, make sure that they stay off the streets, make sure that we give the parents time to take care of their own responsibilities in life? Is that the role of a teacher? Or is our role simply to survive until the end of the teaching period? What is our role in society? What does the wider society expect from us? What do parents expect from us as teachers? What does the economy expect from us? The industry, the people that are going to be employing our students a few years down the line. What do they expect us to do in our jobs? If you are a math teacher, how relevant is your subject to the industry out there? Is it relevant to some, irrelevant to others? If it is relevant to these ones, what is it in what you're teaching that is really relevant, that technically the student is going to directly or indirectly use in their profession? Knowing the extremely wide scope of professional activities that are out in the market nowadays, and the very narrow scope of what we are teaching nowadays. What does government expect from us? Why does government pay us to fulfill our role? These are all the kind of questions that we need to ask ourselves in order to break away from the narrow-minded thinking of, I gotta go into the class at 8 a.m. and I gotta make sure that I cover 1, 2, 3 before 8:55, and then repeat the same thing at 9 a.m. Moving on from that, now let's look at our clients. What do our students expect from us? In order to answer that question, I would like you to imagine the following scenario. Maybe some of you are suffering from a fairly serious condition that is causing them discomfort in their life. Or you might have a relative that is suffering from such a condition. Or somebody you know. So When a person suffering from a serious condition, let's say a person is suffering from a respiratory condition. These are the kind of diseases nowadays that don't have a simple solution. The causes of the disease are very complex. Specialists are struggling to deal with these kind of conditions. Imagine a person going to the hospital to get treatment for such a complex condition. So this person might be 40, 45, 50, 60 years old, and this person is presented to a doctor, a specialist, who's 35 years old. Professional individual, smart, graduated with flying colors, very well renowned in the environment where he's working. However, the patient has something that is gnawing at him, something is bugging him. He just feels that although this particular doctor, he's going by the book, he's applying the knowledge that he has learned and studied and researched by himself to the best of his abilities. Somehow, that patient feels that this doctor does not really understand what this patient is going through. And the reason why this doctor does not understand it is because he himself is not suffering from that condition. So when the patient is complaining to the doctor about the side effects of the medicine, the doctor he does not really want to hear about it, because from his perspective, these side effects, the discomfort caused by these side effects, they are not the priority of what he is trying to deal with. So we see that this kind of scenario will create a disconnection and a break of trust between the doctor on one side and the patient on the other side. Why am I telling you that? How does that relate to us as teachers? Well, let's ask ourselves, if we were to look at our students as patients, if we were to consider them people that come to us for a solution to their problem, and the problem can be defined as the questions that I have mentioned to you in the previous slides. You have this youngster, he is at this stage not very useful to himself, to his parents, to his society, to his peers. And he needs to go through this painful process of growing up in order to build his personality and become useful to his own self first and to his environment second. So could it be that if this youngster feels that we don't really understand what he is going through, we don't really understand the pain that he's experiencing in this difficult process of growing up, could it be that this is one of the main causes of these youngsters losing trust in us, teachers? But if that is true, then the solution to this problem is very simple. Because unlike the doctor, who is not suffering from that respiratory conditions, all of us teachers have suffered at some stage for a long time the same type of pains that our students are suffering today. But somehow, once we became adults, it's like we have deleted this from our memories. We have wiped this clean. No, now we have transcended the state of immaturity, and we are now mature, responsible adults that are beneficial to ourselves and beneficial to the society around us, our colleagues, the industry, our parents, our neighbors, everybody. And it's upon us to teach these foolish youngsters how to become mature adults. With this kind of attitude, trust is just never going to be established between us and our students. So in order to reconnect with what happened to us, everything that's recorded right here, let's ask ourselves a few questions. I would like to take you on a flashback of my education, what you see right here is a picture of my primary school in Luxembourg. So this is a school that had probably around 300 students. It was just primary, means from age 6 till 12. It was a very innocent setup. Although I am from Luxembourg City, as you know, my entire country is only 82 kilometers by 56 kilometers. So the capital city looks like a village by the standard of most other countries in the world. So it had this kind of cozy atmosphere where everybody knew everybody else. And, you know, you were not afflicted by the, you know, big city lifestyle problems that many of our neighboring countries were experiencing. So in that particular school, I was doing fairly all right. I wasn't brilliant, but I was doing okay. You know, my marks were like somewhere between average to good. And, you know, I went through these years without failing and, you know, everything was fantastic. Then I entered secondary school. And here things started getting far more complicated. So here we reached the age of 12. And that particular school had one major evil. It was a school that combined primary and secondary. In other words, the students that, so I reached here only in secondary, but let's say somewhere between 75 to 85% of my colleagues, they had already been in this school for 6 years. They had done all their primary years in that same school. So first of all, these primary students, they were already experiencing the companionship of these teenagers. So at age 6 till 12, you are already directly or closely or loosely hanging out with students from age 12 till 18 or possibly 19 or 20, because in secondary we experience more failure. So, you know, the age group is broader. So this group of students from the primary already had gotten an awful lot of bad influence from the elder generation. There was no reset for these children. Those that came from other schools, they were new. They didn't have this kind of self-confidence, arrogance, bully attitude that the old timers have towards the new timers. And they also knew the ins and outs and the dynamics that they had learned from the previous generation. They knew all the tricks around the building. They knew where to go smoking. They knew where to hide things. They knew how to do a whole bunch of things. And this is a dynamic that encouraged a lot of foolishness. In that particular school, I went down the hill big time. Why? Was it me? Had I changed? No. What happened is that due to peer pressure, due to the need of making friends, I had to fit in an environment where what is gaining a student respect is arrogance, having a kind of attitude of, I don't give a flying fudge about studying, because that is what was promoted through music, movies, cartoons, The Simpsons, etc. And you would think that how could it be that a human being lets music and movies influence himself to the point that he ruins his life? That's the reality of a teenager, people. That's how it works. And I believe that most of you, if not all of you, somehow at some stage, to some extent, you must have experienced something like that. Anyway, after 3 years in that school, I finally failed my year with a lot of bad press from my teachers, and my mother took the decision to cut me out of that environment, and she put me in a boarding school in Belgium in the middle of nowhere in a village that hosts less than maybe 150 inhabitants, and the school is actually an ex-monastery that has been reconverted into a school, and it's still affiliated to the monastery that, you know, was located in there previously. They moved to another location. So you can see a little blue box on the picture. That was the dormitory of the boarding school. There were about 450 students in the day school, but we were about 45 to 50 boys in the boarding school, which means that we would reach there either Sunday night or Monday morning and leave on Friday afternoon, right? The arrow is pointing at the window that was my bedroom in my last year there. Now, just let me give you a little bit of background about this particular school. The rooms were, I mean, if you stood in the room and you could touch both walls with your hands like that, right? You could not fully extend your hands. Like this, you would touch both walls. So you have your bed, then you have like a very narrow gap, then you have your wardrobe, a desk, and a sink, and a window that was extremely thin and extremely worn down. It was extremely cold in winter. Heating wouldn't work very much. But somehow, this boarding school was an ideal environment for studying. The way it functions is that we had to be up at 7 a.m. latest. We had a shower in our dorm, in the corridor of the dorm. We had 6 showers. We had to take turns, 45 people, 6 showers. That's feasible, that's manageable. Then we'd have breakfast, and at 8 o'clock school would start. So we had no commuting. We had no, this kind of stressful being on the bus, crowded, etc. No, we were right there. We have a beautiful yard. We have trees. It's a nice environment, all right? Then school would start at 8 and would last approximately till 4. Then we'd have an hour break with a little snack. And then we'd have to be locked up in our rooms for 2 hours, 5 till 7. So you're locked up in your room, and we used to have a window on our doors. Every room had a window on its door and with a curtain. And during those 2 hours, you'd have to keep the curtain open in order for the overseer to make sure that you're studying. In other words, you're compelled to some sort of discipline. So the question is, how could somebody fail in such an ideal environment? I mean, if you wanted some retreat to study, this place would be ideal. Today, I wish I could go back there in order to study some new things. I even dreamt about it one night. But for some reason, it just didn't happen. Not for me, nor for most people on this dormitory. Why? Let's examine the state of mind of a youngster. So, let's read these sentences. I have a precious opportunity to build my future here. Is that right or wrong? Of course it's right. It was an unbelievable opportunity. Every hour I invest in my studies now will bring ease to me in the future. Is that right or wrong? Of course it's right. I am lucky to be in such a good environment. Few people my age in the world enjoy such an opportunity. Is that right or wrong? It's absolutely right. It's in plain sight for everybody to see. However, this being right, does that mean that that's what's going on in the teenager's mind? No. What's going on in the teenager's mind is the following. I'm stuck in this hole and I have to drag through till the end. That's how we felt. That was the general vibe on the dorm, and even to a big extent in the day school. But us boarders, we were even more in this kind of vibe. Any opportunity to distract myself from studies will make it less painful. In other words, I will focus my energy on finding ways to escape studying, because that will just make it more digestible. It will make time pass quicker, and it will be less of a drag. And of course, the people who are there to help us, guide us, advise us, help us with homework, how do we see them? I'm tired of these overseers breathing down my neck, telling me what to do every moment of the day. This is how we felt. So people, I don't know how Indian culture works, but this is very generalized from where I'm from. And it's not for nothing that the teenage years are so painful. Next issue I forgot to mention, my classes are useless. I just have to drag through. What does a teenager understand from the benefit of their classes? In those days, I wanted to become a sound engineer because I was all into music. I was a DJ and all kind of nonsense back in those days. My dream was to become a sound engineer. I wanted to have a profession related to my passion, which was music. I cut off from music, by the way. I never listened to music anymore. However, the classes that are directly related to this professional ambition of mine that I had, which was mainly physics, I hated it. Why did I hate the physics class? Because I just could not see how what I was learning in class, the time that I was spending in front of this teacher that was arguably a bad teacher, he was not skilled at explaining anything. That's just the reality. However, maybe with a little bit of you know, goodwill from my side, I could still have benefited a lot from him, but that didn't happen. So I just could not see how this time spent in that class, listening to this guy, would be of any benefit later on for me. There is this disconnection between my ambition and what I was doing. So people, this is a recipe for disaster in the mind of a 17-year-old. So, synthesizing what is happening in the mind of a teenager. I would put it as follows. I mean, teenager, even young adult. I mean, even in your 20s, I mean, especially in this day and age, I feel that the process of maturing is kicking in later and later over the last generation and a half. I would describe it, first of all, as a wrong perception of life. General term. What is important in life? What are your values as an individual? What are the things that you value in the world? What is this vague concept of happiness? What's the difference between happiness and pleasure? How are they connected, or how are they clashing? These fundamental questions are extremely foggy, if not outright wrong, in the mind of somebody growing up. And it's no wonder. If you were to connect to your students on social media and see the stuff they post, see the stuff they watch, read the comments that they write, you realize to what extent they are off track. So this being the case, we see that these teenagers, or these growing young people, they are striving to build an image of themselves, indulge in matters that will contribute to building this image of themselves, that will fit this wrong picture they have of the world, that is detrimental and definitely disconnected to what you are trying to teach right now in your classroom. So, this being the case, what are solutions to this problem? As I said, unlike the doctor who hasn't had the respiratory condition, we have gone through issues. So I would like you to think back in time about your own teachers. I want you to remember the faces of the teachers that had a positive impact on you. Who were your personal teachers or your class teachers that you respected? Once you have remembered these individuals, I want you to now replay the events in your memory and try to analyze what it was about this particular teacher that made him or her earn your respect? Likewise, who were the teachers that you hated? And how were your marks, your grades in their classes, in their subjects? And once you have put a face on these individuals, I want you also now to replay what's deep down in your memory and analyze what is it that made you hate these people. Now, while you're doing this, you need to also look at the following matter. Look at the teacher who you hated. Now, you being a teacher, can you maybe sympathize with him? Can you see that maybe some of the treatment that he gave you, or some of the way he conducted his classes, that there was a reason behind it? However, if there was a reason behind his behavior, his way of treating students, whether today you as a teacher believe that it is a legitimate way to treat students this way or not, the result is the same. The action it had upon you yourself shows that this way of acting is flawed, because the impact it had on you was negative. No matter how good the narrative is, the justification for anything, if the end result is bad, we have to understand there is a flaw somewhere that we haven't discovered, and we need to look for it. So please think back through your age as a teenager, as a young adult, somebody who was going through everything he or she was going through in that age, emotionally, physically, whatever. Why was it that the way this person treated you, he earned your disrespect and hatred? And what were the consequences upon your studies and your life? As far as I'm concerned, consequences were dramatic. I got removed from one school. No need to go into details. The past is the past. But all I can tell you is that the consequences were dramatic. Now, I'm not saying that it's all to blame the teacher, but it's the reality of the situation. The next question we need to ask ourselves, the teachers, is that now that we understand how we reacted badly to some behavioral patterns of certain teachers, us as teachers, to what extent are we imitating these same patterns? Are we treating our students, or some of our students, or at least some of the time, in the exact ways that certain teachers treated us that made us fail? If the answer is yes, and it's very likely to be yes for anybody who's honest with themselves, then that is the starting point to reflect on how we need to change our ways in order to become more efficient and to have a better classroom with a better atmosphere and a better bond between the teacher and the students. Moving over now to more technical aspects of discipline. Here are two books that I should like to recommend. The one on the right of the screen, called Setting Limits with Your Strong-Willed Child. Now, this is not a teacher's book. This is a parent's book. This is a book for raising children at home, not at school. However, the fundamental ideology that underlies the frameworks presented in this particular book are the same ones as the other one, which is called Assertive Discipline by the author Lee Cantor. Where am I getting at? I believe most of you are parents. Challenges in classroom are not that far apart from challenges at home. This particular book, Setting Limits with Your Strong-Willed Child, lays a very efficient framework for a parent to analyze his own dynamics of interacting with his own children and understand his problems. A child is a child. A child is not supposed to be rational. A child is not supposed to be responsible. You as a parent are supposed to make a child act in the most positive way possible, despite him not being rational, responsible, mature, reasonable, etc. That's what this particular book is about. Next book, Assertive Discipline, has these same underlying principles, but adapted to the classroom. And we shall explore some of what I believe the most fundamental part of the framework that fits both these scenarios, the home scenario as well as the classroom scenario. So, the basic framework of discipline. Number one is to have clear rules. I insist on both words, clear and rules. You cannot enter a classroom and improvise. That doesn't work. And also for you, take a flashback to your own educational life. Think of now, who were the teachers that had rules and who were the teachers that were improvising? That just came into the classroom and, just try to figure it out. Because those teachers, the only thing was in their mind is that I got to cover the subject. I got to cover material. Starts at 9, finish 9:55, I want to cover this. That's how it functions. How were these teachers' classes, and how was a teacher that might have been improvising on the material? A teacher that might have been adapting to the mood of the classroom and change his content of teaching. However, there seemed to be a management structure that was the same from one class to another. How did that affect the class, and how did that affect you and your learning and your grades at the end of the day? And not only your grades, how did it affect your growing up process as a youngster through that painful part of life? Second part of the framework is clear consequences. What I mean, setting clear consequences, this is the number one tool to avoid conflict. Because if us as a teacher, we don't have a map to follow that we have set up and precisely studied, what will happen is that when we run into a wall with a student, we will get frustrated. And when we get frustrated, we get emotionally fired up and we act in ways that are destructive to our own selves, destructive to our students, and destructive to the class dynamics. And we not only lose that particular student's respect, but we might lose the respect of the entire class. And as Chinese whispers go, we might lose the respect of all the students in the building. Remember, certain teachers that might have been teaching in your building but who never taught you. However, you, although you never sat in one of their classes, you had an opinion about these teachers. Why? Because it just goes through the hallways. Back, 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 back. So anything that you do in a classroom is a root of a long chain of consequences that might follow you for years. So the number one tool to avoid a wrong emotional response to a bad behavior of a student is to have a clear set of consequences for each wrong action of a student. That will lead us to the next part of this framework, which is a clear behavior pattern for yourself. i.e., if students does A, his punishment or the consequences of him having done A will be X, and the way I am going to implement X and break the news to the student is going to be Y. Let's look at how that functions. So, when we speak about rules, I said rules and clarity. I want students to respect me, respect the teacher. Is that a rule? Yep. Yeah, it's definitely a rule. I want students to be doing their work. Students have to do their work. Is that a rule? Of course it is. Students must be on time. Is that a rule? Yes, it is. Are these clear rules? For those who are answering yes, you're wrong. For those who are answering no, you're right. Now I want you to reflect for a minute on why these rules are not clear. And now I want you to think whether your rules, if you do have rules, maybe you don't. Maybe all you think about is common material. If your rules are along the line of these rules right here, are they at the same level of clarity? So let's analyze these rules. I want students to respect me. What is respect? What is respect in general? And what is respect from a student to a teacher? You already see that right here we are dealing with very esoteric terms that can mean very different things to very different people. Flashback to your young days. Do you remember having a certain attitude with a teacher and he will laugh with you about it, and having that same behavior with another teacher and he will get infuriated and punish you? Highly likely. So what does that tell you? That respect means next to nothing. That is not a clear rule. You want students to do their work. Great. When? How? That's unclear. You want students to be on time. On time. What is time? And to be on time doing what? Let's look at a set of rules that are more towards what I mean with clarity. When I talk as a teacher, I'm expecting students to be quiet. In other words, you don't stand in front of the board going blah, 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 and you have two nerds in the front row listening to you, and the rest are just chatting away on their phones, etc., etc. No, there must be a system where when you talk, students listen to what you're saying. And obviously, there are many techniques to this, and this is why I have referred you to these books, Assertive Discipline. You will find a number of ways to enforce this clear rule. And let me throw in there, if you want this to happen, your class cannot be 98% teacher talk time. The less you talk, the more focus you will get for the time that you're talking. Moving forward. No phones allowed in class under any circumstance. Now that's my personal philosophy. I know other teachers, they allow phones in their class. Some of them out of not having rules, and others, they actually have rules on how students are supposed to use their phones in class. The teachers who manage to deal with that, I admire them. As far as I'm concerned, if I see a phone, even if you're just looking at time, even if whatever the reason, or you forget your phone on your desk, or whatever the reason might be, I kick you out of class. It's as simple as that. When you're kicked out of class, you're marked absent, and if your absence exceeds keda or keda, you're denied from the exam by the rules of the college that I was teaching in. That's a clear rule. Everybody has to write their exercises or assignment as soon as I tell them to start, as opposed to I want students to doing their work. In other words, you must have a system where, guys, we're going to start the exercise in a minute. You have 5 minutes. What I'm expecting from you is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is that clear? Fulan, repeat what I just said. Alan, how are you supposed to do this? Faltan, where does the exercise end? And Za'ataran, how much time do you have? All right, go, 5 minutes. And now, anybody who's not doing the exercise will have to bear a consequence. Those are clear rules. Students understand what you mean. Unlike respect, punctuality. That means different things to different people. This way of talking to a student is clear and leaves very little room for interpretation. As far as punctuality is concerned, by the time I was teaching at Ibn Sina College, where the previous speakers are members of, I had a rule that everybody has to be in class. Here I wrote within 2 minutes, by then it was 5 minutes. Within 5 minutes of the period starting. After 5 minutes, I would lock the door. Anybody who's not in stays out. I mark him absent. If his absence exceeds 15 or 20%, I don't remember how much it was, he's denied from the exam, he fails his year. It's as simple as that. It's a clear rule. Everybody understands it. There is no philosophy. Oh, yes, but teacher, I had to go and see that teacher and this. No, 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 listen. I don't care. 5 minutes, that's what I gave you. 5 minutes have gone. Khalas, come back tomorrow, no problem. Don't take it personal. That's how it is. Now, consequences. Here on the left, you have what happens when things get out of control. If you don't have a system of consequences, you will have teachers shouting at students, blaming students, ranting at students, or coming up with a punishment in a state of emotional instability. It's when you are at the absolute end of your patience, when the student has exhausted what you can take. This is when you're gonna come up with a punishment. What's the punishment like that going to be? Death sentence? Yes, likely. Because that's just how human beings are. If you can't think of a punishment while your mind is at rest, you can think reasonably, rationally on what is a beneficial punishment for a student failing to stick to this rule. If you leave it up to the moment where you're going to be emotionally out of it, your punishment is going to be unfair, to say the least. So, have a set of consequences. As I said, student late, access denied to class. It's simple. There is no need for shouting. Students would come to me and scream, and I would just come and say, listen, I understand your frustration, but we have rules. Stick to the rules, you come in. Go against the rules, you have to stay out. It's as simple as that. And being in this framework, it enabled myself, as well as also my colleagues who just adopted the same system, to stay calm in almost every situation. And this diminishes the level of conflict you have with your students. Homework not done, you have to now look at, based on the rules of the institution where you're teaching in, what is a set of consequences that is available to you? Can you give additional assignments, additional homework as a punishment? Can you just send them out of class? Whatever is feasible for you, that you, maybe through trial and error, find out that this is something that works. What can you come up with as a punishment for somebody not doing their homework? Students chatting in class, you're giving explanations, etc., and you have students at the back of the class, you know, girls doing their makeup, whatnot, all kind of nonsense. What is a simple punishment that you can have for this kind of behavior that will just make the students want to avoid this action without you getting into conflict? Now, of course, students, the first time, the second time, and the third time, they're going to argue with you, they're going to shout. Just stay calm, say, look, I made it clear to you. You decided to transgress, bear the consequences. I'm not mad at you. I'm not going to mark you down, but you got to do this now. It's as simple as that. Sorry. And if then the student is going on and trying to make a big fuss about it, you need also to have a punishment for this kind of behavior, etc. So somebody is drawing on the screen. If that person could maybe stop crossing out my my presentation and making little arrows on the screen. Anyway, so where was I at? Yes, the point of having such a system is to avoid conflict and to make sure that the relation you have with your student remains within a scope of rational interacting and respect. From implementing this over years, I have noticed that in the beginning, students always viewed me to be harsh. But within a few months, students learned that, hey, you know what? This guy is cool. The way he interacts with us, we never have arguments, fights, whatever. And somehow, his classes remain interesting because there's some real dynamic of teaching going on. And finally, we have to speak about what Sun Tzu has called the moral law, which is a fundamental rule in leadership. Sun Tzu laid out the foundation for it. There is volumes written about this nowadays. The moral law causes the people to be in complete accord with their ruler, so that they will follow him regardless of their lives, undismayed by any danger. Of course, this is Sun Tzu, The Art of War, is a book on warfare and military strategy. However, the concept that Sun Tzu is laying out for us right here is something which is very applicable to the classroom. And it is the fact that you gain the respect of your students, and your students view you as somebody who might be different. They might understand that you don't relate to the foolishness that they are going through, that you are not interested in the stuff that they are interested right now. However, they can have a relationship based on respect and follow your guidelines in order to have a productive relation. And let me tell you, the most destructive attitude that I believe a teacher can have that will destroy this relation is favoritism. as a teacher, I believe that favoritism and what comes along with it, being prejudice to whoever is not favored, is one of the most disgusting, irresponsible, and oppressive attitude any teacher can have at any level of the academic development of a human being. Teachers who acted in favoritism / prejudice throughout my education are the people that I resent until this day. And I cannot get over it and bring myself to forgive them. And favoritism and prejudice can be due to an unbelievable range of matters that go. Of course, we have the big favorites like racial discrimination, social discrimination, ideological or religious discrimination, but even stranger things. In my days in Europe, I had teachers that hated me for no other reason than having long hair in those days. At age 16, 17, I had hair till here. And I decided to shave my head on my 18th birthday for whatever reason. It's amazing how certain teachers completely switched their attitude towards me as soon as I came into class with short hair. And this is when I understood that the last 2 years, they've been giving me hell for no other reason, marking me down, humiliating me in class for no other reason than me having long hair. Now that is crazy, but that is real. And the impact this can have on a student, you know, I survived it, others haven't. Some of my colleagues, they never got over the treatment that they got from certain teachers. So I shall stop here, inshallah ta'ala. What I want you to carry away from this presentation is that in class, we are dealing with human beings. A relationship with human beings will always be far more complex than what can be explained and laid out in a textbook. So it is for us, no matter of our own personality. We might be introverts, extroverts, outgoing, nerds, constipated PhDs, whatever. In order to build rapport with our students, we need to make an effort and analyze what is this student going through and what can I do to make it easier upon him. That's what I had to say. Thank you very much for your attention. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.